78 out of 100, that was the highest score she'd ever seen. But before that day, she was the billionaire's daughter who failed every test, mocked by classmates, stripped of privilege, and forced to face her reflection. And the man who taught her to stand again. A single dad janitor who whispered one line that changed everything: start at zero. This is the story of downfall, pride, and second chances, where a broken girl, a relentless mother, and a quiet janitor collide in ways no one saw coming. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. The classroom had never been this silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to hold its breath. Mrs. Carter's red pen struck like a gavel against paper as she slid the test across the desk. 18 out of 100, the teacher announced, her voice sharp enough to slice through the stillness. It wasn't meant to be a sentence, but it landed like one. The room exhaled, not with sympathy, but with hunger. A few kids chuckled under their breath, the cruel kind of laughter that thrived on someone else's humiliation. Others leaned in, waiting for the reaction. At the back, Emma Carter straightened her shoulders, sliding her sunglasses higher up the bridge of her nose, even though the blinds kept the sun away. She tilted her chin like she had seen her mother do in boardrooms, and the smirk, thin, rehearsed a shield, settled on her lips. If she showed even a flicker of pain, they would devour her. The numbers on the page, bleeding red, glared up at her. 18-100. She folded the test with a casual flick, tucking it into her designer backpack. The bag itself cost more than most kids' families spent on groceries in a month, and Emma wore it like armor. Guess money doesn't buy brains, a boy muttered 2 rows over. Emma didn't turn. She didn't flinch. She simply rose her sneakers, clicking against the tile as the bell shrieked. Students spilled into chatter, but the laughter trailed behind her like smoke. In the parking lot, her Audi gleamed under the gray morning light, sleek and black, as if it were a trophy rather than a car. She tapped the fob, savoring the jealous glances that still followed her despite the grade. Control. That was the illusion she clung to. Then the tow truck lurched into view. Metal clanged, chains rattled. The Audi jerked upward, hoisted into the air like a carcass on display. Emma froze, her sunglasses sliding down her nose. "What is this?" she barked, her voice high brittle. The driver didn't look at her. Order came from the owner, Victoria Carter. The name hit harder than the laughter that erupted behind her. Phones appeared like weapons, recording the scene, the billionaire's daughter losing not just a car but her dignity. Emma shoved through the crowd, heat flooding her cheeks. She stormed back inside, sneakers squeaking against polished floors, each step louder than the last. She cut down a side hallway one students rarely used. That's when she heard it. A mop sliding in slow, steady rhythm. The faint squeak of water across tile. At the far end of the corridor, a man in a faded janitor's uniform moved in deliberate arcs. His hair was peppered with gray, his jaw rough with stubble. His sleeves were rolled, revealing forearms corded from years of work. He didn't look up when she passed, but his voice drifted low, calm as still water. "If you want to win, kid," he said, "start at zero." Emma froze mid-step, her anger colliding with confusion. She turned halfway, narrowing her eyes. "Excuse me?" The man leaned on the mop handle, studying the streak of water glinting on the floor. His gaze, when it rose, didn't waver. "All that noise out there, cars, clothes grades." "It's nothing. You want to learn, start at zero." Emma barked out a laugh, sharp and hollow. "Yeah, thanks, Shakespeare. I'll keep that in mind while you're—" She flicked her hand. "What waxing floors?" His expression didn't change. He simply pushed the mop forward again, water spreading like glass across the tiles. "Floors stay clean when you do the work," he said evenly. "So do people." Emma rolled her eyes, but the words snagged somewhere deep, like burrs she couldn't shake off. She marched away, sunglasses back in place, smirk restored. But her chest burned and the phrase trailed her into the silence. Start at zero. That night, the Carter mansion's marble kitchen glowed beneath chandeliers. Victoria Carter stood at the center phone pressed to her ear, her voice slicing through the air. "No, the report is unacceptable. I don't pay for excuses. I pay for results." She ended the call with a snap, then turned to her daughter. "You got an 18. Emma leaned against the fridge, arms crossed. "So I don't need algebra to run a company. That's what accountants are for." Her mother's eyes, steel gray, narrowed. "Don't you dare talk to me like you've earned the right to dismiss it. If you worked for me, you'd be fired. I'm not your employee. Emma shot back, her smirk wobbling. I'm your daughter. Big difference. Victoria stepped closer, perfume sharp and suffocating. The world doesn't care, Emma. Either you become someone or you'll be another rich kid with no spine, and I won't carry you. The ticking of the clock filled the silence. Emma wanted to spit something back, but the weight of her mother's words pressed against her chest like iron. She grabbed a soda, cracked it open, and stormed upstairs. Later, she stared at the ceiling of her cavernous room. The Audi was gone, her credit cards canceled. Even her driver had been reassigned. She was stripped down, humiliated, and worst of all, alone. But in the quiet, one sentence pulsed through her mind, stubborn as a heartbeat. If you want to win, start at zero. The bus stop had never looked so unforgiving. Emma Carter stood among the cluster of students she had mocked for years, her tailored blazer pulled tight against the morning chill. No tinted window sedan, no leather seats, no driver to shield her from stares. Just gum-stained pavement and the weight of silence punctured by muffled laughter. A boy whispered loud enough for her to hear, "Guess the princess lost her crown." Emma pressed her lips into a thin line and fixed her eyes on the cracked asphalt. She would not give them the satisfaction. The bus wheezed up, brakes squealing. She climbed aboard, her heels clicking against the metal steps. The smell hit her. First old leather, spilled soda sweat from 100 restless kids. Heads turned, some smirked, others pulled out phones. Emma slid into an empty seat near the back spine, straight eyes hidden behind her sunglasses. Her throat burned, but she would rather choke than let them see weakness. When the bus jolted forward, she gripped the edge of her seat. Start at zero. The janitor's words flickered again, unwanted but unshakable. By the time she arrived at Ridgeview, her armor had cracks. She marched through the halls, ignoring the sneers that trailed her like knives. And then she saw him again. The same faded uniform. The same steady rhythm of mop against tile. Daniel Cole didn't look surprised when her shadow fell across his floor. "You again," Emma muttered. "Me again." His tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. She folded her arms. "What are you, some philosopher in disguise, quoting dead guys while scrubbing gum off the floor?" Daniel leaned the mop against the wall, crossing his arms. Stranger still, a girl with the world at her feet, who can't pass a reading test. The words sliced. Emma's cheeks flushed hot. "Screw you," she snapped, storming off before the sting could rise to her eyes. But the sting didn't fade. It grew crawling under her skin. By third period, it was undeniable. Another test landed on her desk, this one worse than the last. The teacher didn't say a word, just gave her that look. Tired, disappointed, pitying. Emma stared at the paper. 24%. Below it, written in neat cursive, "Did you even read the passage?" The classroom blurred. Laughter hissed around her. For once, she didn't smirk. When the bell rang, she ducked through the back entrance to avoid eyes. Her sneakers squeaked against polished tile. And there he was again. Mop bucket. Lemon cleaner, calm eyes. "Rough day?" Daniel asked. Emma stopped, throat tightening. "You said something last time about Socrates." "You remembered. Yeah, weird for a janitor to quote philosophers." Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, crossing his arms. Weirder still when a girl born with every advantage can't sit still long enough to learn. She winced. "You used to be a teacher, didn't you?" Silence stretched. His gaze sharpened. "Not just philosophy. Plenty more before life threw me off balance." The hallway echoed with distant laughter. Emma swallowed. For the first time, she didn't feel like mocking. She felt like begging. "Then teach me," she whispered. "Please." Daniel studied her for a long moment, eyes steady as stone. Finally, he nodded once. On one condition. Emma leaned forward, hope and defiance colliding in her chest. "What you leave your name and your pride at the door. Start from zero, from the floor." Her chest rose and fell. She thought of her mother's words, of the humiliation clinging like smoke, of the laughter that echoed louder than her own voice. "Fine," she said. Her voice cracked, but she didn't back down. "I can't keep failing." Daniel extended his hand. Daniel Cole. Emma hesitated, then shook it. "Emma." His grip was firm, steady, the kind that made promises. Tomorrow, Daniel said. We begin. That night, Emma lay awake staring at the green notebook he had shoved into her hands. Its blank pages glared back at her, daring her to waste them, or let them change everything. For the first time in her life, Emma Carter wondered if the floor, not the ceiling, was where she needed to start. Dawn didn't break so much as seep the thin, pale kind of light that makes a hallway look like a photograph left too long in the sun. The school was still asleep. Lockers stood like sentries. The exit signs cast red ovals on polished tile. Somewhere a boiler coughed the building, clearing its throat before first bell. Emma Carter's sneakers squeaked once, then fell quiet. She clutched the green notebook he'd given her like it might try to run. Starting over sounded poetic at midnight. At 6:10 a.m., with breath fogging in the cool air of the East Wing, it felt like walking into a courtroom. Daniel Cole was already there. He worked in a careful rhythm, sleeves rolled wrists, turning the mop as if he were erasing something and inviting it back cleaner. A dented steel thermos waited on the windowsill beside a folded rag, a little shrine to repetition. He didn't look up when she arrived. "You're late," he said without checking a watch. "I'm 20 minutes early," she shot back. "For school, maybe. For the work late." He parked the mop against the wall, wiped his hands, and finally met her eyes. "We settle something first." She raised her chin. "I showed up, didn't I?" Showing up is not the same as shedding. He nodded at the double doors behind her. Beyond them, the school's main corridor stretched toward trophy cases and framed championship photos, the hallway that knew her name by shine alone. "Out there, you're a Carter, and here you're a student. Say it." "Say what my name doesn't matter." Emma's eyebrows jumped. "Excuse me." He didn't blink. "If you want me to teach you, you leave your name and your pride at the door. It's the only way this works." She tried to laugh and couldn't find the air. In her head, the old answers lined up the practiced sarcasm, the bored flip of hair. But the image of her Audi swinging on a chain of a camera lens, capturing her like prey, flashed behind her eyes. She swallowed. "My name doesn't matter," she muttered. Again. "My name doesn't matter," she said louder this time, as if volume could keep the truth from touching her. He waited a beat longer than felt humane, then nodded once. "Good." He handed her a pen he produced from his shirt pocket. It wasn't sleek or pretty, just a cheap black rollerball with a chewed cap. It felt like a dare. "Sit," he said. He pointed her to a bench beside a bank of tall windows. Dust motes drifted like snow in the strip of sunlight. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books. Someone had left a faded bulletin board announcement for a canned food drive that ended 2 winters ago. It felt wrong and somehow perfect. Page 1. Daniel said, standing opposite her, the mop resting against his leg like a soldier's pike at ease. "Write about your greatest fear. 10 minutes. Don't stop the pen. If nothing comes out, write nothing until something does. No crossing out, no starting over, no performance." Emma scowled. "You want an essay?" "A list." "What I want the truth," he said. "You can decorate it later." Decorate. A word she understood. She'd been decorating truths for years until even she couldn't see the bare wall behind them. She clicked the pen. The notebook's first page looked like a cliff. "This is stupid," she said out of habit, more than conviction. He didn't argue. He checked his phone. The glass was cracked in a spiderweb at the corner and started a timer. Go. The first seconds hurt physically the way a limb protests after being asked to move for the first time in too long. The pen scratched, hesitated, skittered. She wrote about hating tests, then about hating teachers, then about hating the way her mother's heels sounded on marble when she was angry. The sentences came in fragments, ugly and obvious, and not at all like the essays that had earned her last night pity and first morning failure. 90 seconds, Daniel said. She squeezed the pen harder. The ink track grew darker. Something gave way, not a breakthrough, so much as a tiny knock at a locked door. She wrote, "I'm afraid I'm stupid." The word looked bigger than the line could hold. Her hand shook. She didn't cross it out. She kept going. "I'm afraid if I try for real and fail, there will be nothing left to pretend with. I'm afraid my mom loves a version of me that doesn't exist. I'm afraid of rooms where people already decided who I am." 30 seconds. The timer chirped. Emma's last sentence trailed off in an ink bruise. She capped the pen like she was bandaging a wound and flipped the notebook shut, breathing hard for no good reason. Daniel didn't take the notebook. Again tomorrow, he said. Same question. Tomorrow. She laughed without humor. You didn't even read it. It's not for me. His tone had narrowed into something surgical. It's for you. Fear only shrinks when you look it in the eye 3 times. She bristled. That's not how tests work. That is exactly how learning works. He leaned his hip against the window ledge and folded the rag like a figure 8, neat and automatic. 1 pass makes a floor look fine. The 2nd pass shows the stains. The 3rd, if you're patient, you see the real tile. Oh my God, are you seriously comparing me to grout? I'm comparing bad habits to grime. He allowed himself a thin smile. Both are sticky. She stared at him. So that's your big plan. Make me journal until I magically get an A. He cocked his head. Do you want a trick or a foundation trick? She said reflexively. Obviously. Honest. Good. But tricks fail when the lights go out. He nodded toward the notebook. Foundation keeps you standing when they do. She looked away toward the row of lockers opposite. The metal reflected the window light in long silver ribs. Somewhere in the building, a custodian cart rattled. Somewhere else, a door latch clicked. The school was waking up. What happened to you? She asked suddenly. You talk like somebody who used to be more. More what he said. More than this. She gestured vaguely to the mop, the bucket, the uniform at odds with the precision in his voice. He considered her for a beat, then reached for the mop again. I used to teach, he said. Writing, a program for kids who needed a place to start. What happened budget? The word landed like a dropped wrench. He didn't elaborate. For reasons she didn't fully understand, she felt a slice of anger on his behalf, hot and immediate. The world moved money with the flick of a finger. How did a flick decide which futures lived and which died? He was already over it, or at least over talking about it. He tapped the mop handle against the floor near her toe, and the small, clean sound snapped her attention back. Second exercise, he said. Read out loud. She stiffened. Absolutely not. Your voice has to learn it can carry your thoughts. My voice carries just fine, she said, and even she could hear the falseness in it. He waited. She opened the notebook again, found the place where the ink bruise had dried into a small continent, and cleared her throat. The first words came out sideways, her tongue tripping the way runners do the first day back on a track. She read too fast, then too slow. The sentence about being stupid scraped her throat raw on the way out. She thought she'd skip it. She didn't. Her voice shook. It didn't break. When she finished, the hallway felt different, like someone had opened a window she couldn't see. Daniel didn't clap. He didn't give a gold star or a pity smile. He nodded once, the same way he'd nodded, for my name doesn't matter, as if he were marking the lay of a foundation stone. Homework, he said. She groaned. Seriously. You'll write the same thing again tonight, he said, but slower. Then you'll sleep. In the morning, you'll copy it once more, then bring all 3 pages. That's reps, he said. Trying doesn't build muscle. Reps do. She hooked her hair behind her ear and studied him for a second like she could catch him falling out of character. But there was no performance on his face. Just a steadiness that didn't wear out under scrutiny. A shriek of a bell far down the corridor cut the quiet. The building exhaled. Voices and footsteps spilled into the main hall, faint. At first, then louder, the sound of 100 stories coming back online. Emma stood clutching the notebook. What am I supposed to do when people laugh? Decide which war you want to win, he said. That sounds like something on a poster. It's something learned on a floor. He tipped his chin toward the approaching noise. Out there, your ego wants a scene. In here, your mind wants a life. Feed the right one and the other starves. She started to roll her eyes and found she couldn't quite get them to do it. You know you're infuriating, right? I've heard, he said. His mouth twitched just barely. He picked up the thermos, unscrewed the cap, and poured a splash of coffee into it. The smell drifted between them, dark, honest, no sugar. Without thinking, she reached for the pen he'd given her and tucked it behind her ear, like she'd seen writers do in films. It stayed there too heavy, and just right at the same time. Same time tomorrow, he said. She hesitated. What if I'm late? You'll be late, he said. You'll also be here. She started to say something and didn't. She had the strange sense that if she stayed 1 second longer, he'd see right through her. She turned toward the double doors. The main corridor burst into view, lockers slamming, sneakers squealing, laughter vaulting off cinder block and glass. Someone brushed past and muttered, "Look who's up early." Punishment hour with the janitor. Emma's chest lifted. The old line, sharp, cruel automatic, rose to her tongue. She tasted it, then let it dissolve. "Enjoy your day," she said instead, and kept walking. At lunch, she ate alone by choice, the green notebook open, flat on the table. She copied the morning's lines slowly, angrily, then less angrily. When she reached the sentence about being stupid, her stomach clenched, but her hand didn't stop. By last period, she'd tucked the notebook inside her hoodie, like smuggling out a small living thing. That night, her room felt too ornate for what she was trying to do in it, too much glass and chrome and expensive nothing. She sat cross-legged on the rug near her window and wrote the fear again slower. The word stupid didn't shrink on the page, but it didn't swell either. It just sat there, honest and unwelcome, like a guest who'd come to stay until you learned its real name. When her mother's heels clicked down the hall, Emma flipped the notebook shut and stared at the door. The steps passed. The house held its breath. She opened the notebook again and underlined a sentence she hadn't planned to write. "If I fail after trying, at least the failure will be mine." She didn't know it yet, but that line would hold when the rest of the world pushed. In the morning before the sun decided what kind of day to be, Emma was already lacing her sneakers. She slid the notebook into her bag and caught her reflection in the mirror. No sunglasses, no smirk, just a girl with a pen behind her ear and ink on her fingers. The bus hissed, the hallway yawned. The east wing waited in its quiet strip of light. She walked faster. The east wing smelled faintly of dust and lemon, like an old library that hadn't quite given up on being useful. Emma Carter pushed open the heavy door with her shoulder clutching the green notebook like it was fragile glass. Daniel Cole was already there, sleeves rolled, mopping the corridor in long, deliberate arcs. His motions were so precise they almost looked rehearsed, like a soldier performing drills. The bucket wheels squeaked with each shift, a slow rhythm that filled the silence. "You're early," he said without glancing up. Emma cleared her throat. "You said we'd start today." "We did." He leaned the mop against the wall, folded the rag in his hand like a deck of cards, and finally turned to face her. His eyes carried no rush, no surprise, just that unsettling steadiness she couldn't decide if she hated or needed. "But before we start," he continued, "we settle something." Emma frowned. "I already said it yesterday. My name doesn't matter. Words mean less without weight. Today I want you to act like you believe it." She bristled. "How am I supposed to do that? By listening? By not hiding behind sarcasm? By sitting down and working like everyone else?" Her first instinct was to laugh, to make some quip about how the Carter name had paid for half this school's renovations. But the memory of her Audi being dragged off a tow truck silenced her. Instead, she muttered, "Fine." Daniel gestured to a worn wooden bench under a tall window where dust swirled in a stream of pale light. "Sit." She sat crossing her legs tightly, notebook balanced on her knee. The page stared back at her, clean and hostile. "Page 1, he instructed. "Write your greatest fear. 10 minutes. Don't stop until the timer says stop." Emma sighed dramatically. "We did this yesterday, and you'll do it again today, and tomorrow. Repetition is where the truth hides. This is stupid. Stupid is a place to start." She clenched her jaw, but the pen touched paper anyway. At first her hand sketched nonsense doodles, fragments, shallow lines about hating math and hating teachers. But the pen didn't stop, and soon the words slipped into darker cracks. "I'm afraid of failing so bad that even my mom can't pretend I'm worth something." Her throat tightened as she wrote it. The letters looked ugly, uneven, but they sat there undeniable. The timer beeped. Daniel didn't reach for the notebook. He didn't even glance at it. "Again tomorrow," he said. She slammed the pen down. "You're not even going to check if it's good. Good isn't the goal. Honest is." Emma blinked. Teachers had always circled her answers in red, measured her in percentages. But Daniel didn't even seem to care about the paper. His calmness disarmed her in a way grades never had. She tucked the notebook away and stood brushing invisible dust from her designer jeans. "So what now?" You gonna make me mop floors as homework? Daniel's mouth twitched, half smile, half pity. Might be good for you. Emma rolled her eyes. Not happening. The next morning, she arrived again earlier this time. Daniel simply nodded at her and set the timer. 10 more minutes. Her pen scratched angrily at first, then slowed, then bled into another unplanned confession. I'm afraid people will find out I don't know who I am without money. Her chest ached when she set the pen down. By the third day, the ritual felt less like punishment and more like relief. But the world outside wasn't kind enough to let her change in peace. At lunch, whispers followed her down the corridor. Josh Miller, Ridgeview's Golden Boy quarterback, leaned against the lockers with a smirk sharp enough to cut glass. His phone was already recording as he sneered, "Look at this, boys." The princess of Ridgeview spending her mornings with the janitor. His buddies laughed, their voices echoing against the lockers. Smile, Emma. Josh jeered. This is going on TikTok. At Princess of Mops. Emma's fists clenched, her vision tunneled red. She took a step forward, ready to lunge, but then from the end of the hall, Daniel's voice cut through like a bell. Stop. Emma froze mid-step. Josh's laughter rang louder. He's mocking me. Emma snapped, her voice cracking. Your ego wants to win today, Daniel said calmly, eyes locking with hers. Your mind wants to win for life. Decide which one you'll feed. The words cut sharper than Josh's taunts. Emma's fists trembled, but slowly, painfully, she unclenched them. Josh scoffed, shoving his phone into his pocket. Whatever. Enjoy your mop club, Carter. He strutted away, his laughter fading. The hallway fell into heavy silence. Emma collapsed onto the nearest bench, shame burning her cheeks. You think I'm weak now, don't you? She muttered. Daniel shook his head. No, I think you just learned restraint, and restraint is harder than throwing a punch. Emma stared down at the notebook in her lap, her reflection faint in the green cover. For the first time in her life, she wondered if weakness and strength had been backward all along. The following dawn, the east wing was colder than usual. The air seeped in through cracks in the old windows, frosting the edges of the glass, and making Emma's breath puff white in the dim light. She hugged the green notebook tighter against her chest, as if it could keep her warm. Daniel Cole was already waiting, of course. He was always waiting. His mop leaned against the wall, but this time he wasn't moving it. Instead, he sat on the bench beneath the tall windows, thermos steaming between his hands. You're early, Emma said, surprised to find him still. You beat me, he corrected, sliding over a fraction so she'd have room to sit. Means you're starting to care. Emma scoffed, dropping onto the bench. Or maybe the bus was on time for once. Daniel didn't argue. He just reached into his pocket and set a battered stopwatch on the bench between them. Its glass face was scratched, its numbers faint, but it ticked with relentless accuracy. 10 minutes, he said. Emma sighed, flipping open to a fresh page. The ritual again. 10 minutes of pouring her guts onto paper she wasn't sure she even wanted to read back. But something happened that morning. Instead of circling around her fears, she wrote about her mother. About Victoria's sharp words about the way heels on marble echoed like judgment, about the way silence in the mansion felt heavier than noise. By the time the timer beeped, her hand ached, but her chest felt lighter. Daniel glanced at the notebook, but didn't reach for it. Bring it again tomorrow. Emma slammed it shut. Don't you ever get bored of saying the same thing? His eyes softened, though his tone stayed even. That's the point. Repetition is what scrapes away the lies. She looked at him, at the calm lines on his weathered face. For a moment she saw past the uniform and the mop and wondered who he had been before life demoted him to this. Why do you even care if I learn anything? She asked suddenly. He shrugged, sipping from his thermos. Because I've seen kids with less than you learn to fight for truth. And I've seen kids with more than you waste it all. Which side you fall on? That's your choice. Emma rolled her eyes, but the words settled inside her, stubborn and heavy. By the fourth morning, she was already seated when Daniel arrived. The notebook lay open on her lap, her pen moving before he even spoke. He paused at the end of the hall, watching for a moment, and though his expression didn't shift, the faintest twitch touched the corner of his mouth. You know what your problem is, Carter? He asked quietly. Emma looked up, glaring. I thought we left names at the door. Exactly, Daniel said. Your problem is you keep sneaking it back in. Her jaw tightened. I'm trying. Trying doesn't build muscle. Reps do. So here's your first real rep right about the thing you won't say out loud. The thing that makes you feel small. Emma's stomach lurched. She wanted to argue, to protest, to laugh it off, but the challenge in his steady eyes pinned her in place. Slowly, she lowered her pen to the page. The first lines were shaky, halting, but they came. She wrote about standing in her mother's shadow, about never feeling enough even when everything around her screamed that she had it all. When she finished, her hands were trembling and she slammed the notebook shut. Happy now, she snapped. Daniel didn't look at the notebook. Better. You're closer to the floor. She groaned, shoving the pen into her bag. You and your metaphors, man. He stood, picking up the mop again. Metaphors last longer than numbers on a page. Remember that. Later that week, something unexpected happened. When Emma entered the East Wing, she wasn't alone. A girl with dark braids and thick glasses stood by the library door, clutching a stack of textbooks to her chest. She looked startled, as though she'd stumbled into a secret. Am I interrupting? The girl asked timidly. Emma narrowed her eyes. This isn't tutoring. But Daniel lifted a hand. If you're here to work, you're welcome. Leave your name at the door. The girl hesitated, then nodded. Priya, I freeze on essays. I just thought maybe... Emma groaned. Great, now it's a club for misfits. Daniel didn't flinch. Better misfits who build something than heirs who break everything. Priya slid into a seat across from Emma. The three of them sat in silence, the scratch of pens filling the abandoned wing, and for the first time Emma realized the quiet didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt purposeful. By the next morning, the East Wing felt less like a corridor and more like a room that had remembered what it was for. The light came thinner winter white through a high panes, finding the dust and making it glow. A round table, rescued from a storage closet and still scarred with compass cuts, sat crooked near the library doors. A second chair had joined the first, then a third, as if the furniture itself had decided to take a risk. Emma arrived with the green notebook clamped under her arm. Priya was already there, hugging a stack of textbooks like a life vest. She offered a small, uncertain smile. Emma, without thinking, returned one half a nod, the kind of truce that didn't need negotiating. Daniel set a dented thermos on the table and pulled a fourth chair into place. We're not a class, he said. We're a workshop. There are rules. Emma tipped back in her chair, ankle crossed over knee, pretending not to care as much as she did. Priya leaned forward as if she could will the words faster out of him. Rule 1, Daniel said, holding up a finger. No last names. In here, no one gets to be a family crest or a college brochure. You are a voice and a set of hands. If you can't live with that, the doors are open. Emma's mouth twitched. What if I like my last name? Keep it, he said evenly, just not in this room. Priya nodded almost gratefully. Something in her shoulders dropped. Rule 2, he continued. Honesty is not optional. You can be messy, quiet, angry, scared. But if you fake it, your words will collapse under their own weight. We don't carry words that won't carry themselves. He let the silence hang for a beat, then added, Rule 3. No one bleeds alone. If this world laughs out there, it does it without us. And here we defend one another. If you break that, the workshop breaks. And I don't build broken things. Emma traced a finger over a knife groove in the tabletop, the kind of vandalism that outlives the kid who made it. Without meaning to, she heard her own breath in the quiet. Phones, Daniel said, holding out a small metal tray he must have stolen from a science lab. Face down. Emma's eyebrows shot up. That's a little Soviet, don't you think? Phone down, Carter? He said, not unkindly. She hesitated, then surrendered the rectangle like a ceremonial sword. It clacked against the tray. Priya added hers, cheeks pinking. Daniel slid the tray beneath the table with his shoe like a magician making something disappear. Open your notebooks, he said. 10 minutes. Write the truth like it's the only currency. Then we read. Priya went first voice so soft at the beginning that the words seemed to hide. By her second paragraph, they were standing. She read about freezing in front of blank pages, about teachers who praised her diagrams but sighed at her sentences, and about how she had learned to speak with numbers because letters betrayed her. When she finished, she kept her eyes on the table like she'd just confessed a crime. "Thank you," Daniel said. "What stayed with me?" He looked at Emma. That line, "I speak science because it doesn't lie about what it measures." That's clean and brave. Save it. Priya blinked as if the word brave had never been taped to her name before. She pressed the notebook to her chest in a small private hug. Emma felt the pressure to match it something she hated and craved at once. She cleared her throat and read what she'd written in the dawn, a trembling paragraph about marble floors and the echo of her mother's heels about pretending to be fine because the sound of disappointment hurt more than the tests themselves. When she reached the sentence she'd underlined the night before, "If I fail after trying, at least the failure will be mine," her voice wanted to break. It didn't. Daniel didn't clap. He never clapped. What stayed with me? He looked at Priya. The heels, Priya said, surprising herself with the speed of her answer, the sound like judgment. "I heard it." "Then keep it," Daniel said to Emma. "Cut the adjectives around it. Let the sound stand." Emma stared at him. Teachers had always circled. He sharped. They bled her with percentages. He pared her to bone and then told her the bone could hold. The door pushed open with a soft, reluctant squeak. A boy in a gray hoodie hovered there, eyes fixed on the floor, one hand worrying the fray of his sleeve. He might have bolted if Daniel hadn't said his name before the kid could retreat. Luis Daniel said, "You found us." The boy glanced up, startled. Miss Delgado said maybe." He swallowed and started again. "I can't, like when I have to read in front of people, my throat just, you know," closes, Emma offered. She felt the word in her own muscles. He nodded, relief moving quick across his face like sun behind a cloud. He slipped into the fourth chair, his notebook so new the spine creaked. "Phones are down," Daniel said, voices up. For the next hour they worked. No one took roll. No one handed out grades. Daniel gave them drills that were plain and strangely punishing. Write a scene using only sound. Describe an object without naming it. Copy your own paragraph by hand and remove every word that didn't carry its weight. He set 10-minute timers and never let them cheat. Time became a shape, the work a muscle they could feel. When Emma's language got slick, when she reached for a phrase she thought sounded like writing, Daniel would tilt his head. "Floor," he'd say, and she'd tear it down to the tile. At the end of the session, he uncapped a marker and wrote 3 words on a torn cardboard box flap he'd taped to the wall. "Start at 0." The letters were blocky and imperfect, the O more oval than circle. It looked like something a child would draw, and somehow that made it truer. "Not a slogan," he said. "A position. You stand here until you earn the next inch." He turned to pry open a stuck window, letting a slash of cool air through. Emma leaned toward Priya, dropping her voice to a whisper. "Does he know he talks like a fortune cookie?" Priya bit back a smile. The intense kind, like artisan fortune cookie. Emma's almost smile evaporated when the bell blared somewhere in the main building, a violent noise in a tender room. They packed slowly, reluctant. When they reached under the table for their phones, Daniel kept a palm over the tray for half a second longer. "Promises," he said, scanning their faces. "You know what you heard today. Protect it. You don't need to defend yourselves to the world, but you do need to defend this room." Luis nodded. Priya said, "Yes." Emma, to her own surprise, found herself answering, "Okay." They spilled into the hall, words unused to their throats, shoulders hitching, as the noise of the regular day poured over them, lockers slamming, sneakers squealing, announcements crackling. As they turned the corner toward the main corridor, 2 boys leaned back from a drinking fountain. One of them, a wide receiver with a haircut that cost more than Emma's first 3 notebooks, looked up through wet lashes and smirked. "Morning study group," he said. "What are we studying, janitorial science?" Luis ducked his head. Priya went very still. Emma felt the old gasoline heat catch in her chest. She could pour it. She could watch it burn. She pictured Josh's phone the way it would love her rage. She pictured Daniel's cardboard letters on the wall. "English," she said, voice light. "You should try it sometime. Word is, colleges are into words." The boy blinked, surprised at the lack of explosion, then snorted and spun his combination lock like a wheel of fortune. Priya's shoulder brushed Emma's a tiny thank you with no vowels. At lunch, they claimed a back table no one else wanted. Luis drew circles on the edge of his tray. Priya wrote and crossed out a title 3 times. Emma copied a paragraph by hand, then crossed out 5 words in a row, feeling each deletion like a breath released. You know, Priya said, eyes on her page. I think he's right. About which part Emma asked. He says a lot of weird, right-sounding things. About honesty. Priya lifted her gaze. I mean, I write like I'm taking a test even when I'm not. Like someone's grading me for being a person. Emma's chest tightened around the accuracy of it. I've been a multiple-choice human for years. Luis laughed unexpectedly, a small, real sound. Same. I always pick C, even when it's wrong. They smiled together, 3 kids who had 24 hours earlier had nothing to do with one another except a hallway and a building and the urge to survive them both. That afternoon, the rules crossed from room to rib. When a teacher asked Emma to read a paragraph from the textbook, she did tripping twice, correcting herself once deciding not to die over the 3rd fumble. When a group project turned into the usual scramble to crown a leader, Priya said quietly but clearly, "Let's start by listening." When a kid at the vending machine shoulder-checked Luis and called him mute button, Emma said, "He talks when it matters." The cracks in Emma's armor didn't feel like failures anymore. They felt like windows. Through them she could see out and other people could see in. Near the end of the day, as the final bell yawned, the building open, a whisper moved ahead of them in the hallways, a thin electric thread. It had a name attached to it, Josh. He was laughing harder than the joke required, phone loose in his hand, as if everyone else's life was content he was producing. He passed them without stopping, but he looked too long and he smirked too easily. Emma felt the gasoline heat again and let it pass through. Later, she would learn that restraint was not a one-time virtue, but a repeated choice, a muscle trained by mornings and ink and cardboard commandments. For now, she walked with Priya and Luis back toward the east wing. The library door was propped with a rubber wedge. Inside, the table waited with its compass cuts and the cardboard flap hung crooked on the wall, the marker letters already smudged by a careless shoulder. Emma reached out and traced the O with her fingertip, as if completing the circle would make the rules stronger. It didn't make anything easier. It made something possible. Tomorrow, Priya asked. Same time Emma said. Don't be late, Luis added, and they all laughed because lateness was the least of what had brought them here. Outside, the sky had dropped a shade, the light turning pewter over the parking lot. Emma took the bus home and watched the town scroll by Barber Shop Bakery, a church with a cracked bell. Her reflection in the window held the pen behind her ear and a line of ink across her knuckle. She looked like someone who had been doing work no one could film. Back in the mansion, the heels would click on marble and the house would perform its echo. But in the morning, the door to the east wing would stick, and then give, and the notebooks would open and the timer would start, and the circle of chairs would be a place she could stand even when sitting down. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed too loud. Somewhere else, a roomer learned to walk. It didn't matter. The workshop had 3 rules and a cheap marker sign that said enough for now. Start at 0. The next week arrived with rain that drummed on the high windows of the east wing, smearing the daylight into soft gray. The sound carried into the room where 4 chairs now sat in a crooked square notebooks stacked like armor on the table. Luis arrived first, hood-up shoes leaving dark prints on the tiles. Priya slipped in behind him, balancing an umbrella and her ever-present stack of textbooks. Emma was last, hair-damp, cheeks flushed from running. Daniel didn't comment on their tardiness or their dripping shoes. He slid a paper bag onto the table and unwrapped 4 foil packets, the smell of warm breakfast burritos filling the room. Writers burn calories, he said. Eat. Luis's eyes widened as if free food might vanish if he blinked too long. Priya whispered a thank you so soft it nearly drowned in the rain. Emma broke hers in half and immediately asked, "What's the catch?" Daniel leaned against the windowsill. "No catch, but while you chew, you'll listen." He held up a folded sheet of paper covered in his rough handwriting. "This isn't from me. It's from Baldwin. James Baldwin. Heard of him?" Luis shook his head. Priya raised a cautious hand. Emma crossed her arms. My mother says Baldwin was too angry to be useful. Daniel gave her a level look. Then maybe she was never listening. He read, "You write in order to change the world, knowing perfectly well that you probably can't, but also knowing that literature is indispensable to the world." The rain hushed at the windows as the words landed. Luis leaned forward. "So, even if nobody cares, you write anyway?" "Exactly," Daniel said. "Because writing changes you, and sometimes that's the only change you can control." Emma tore off another piece of burrito, chewing slower. The idea that failure could still matter pressed at her ribs like a bruise. They began their drills. This time, Daniel pushed harder. "Describe a room you hate without naming it. 10 minutes. Emma wrote about the Carter estate dining room, the endless table, the silver that glared like teeth, the silence that wasn't silent but judgment. She didn't use the word mansion once. Priya wrote about the chemistry lab where her hands shook so badly she dropped a beaker and everyone laughed. Luis wrote about the bus ride where seats filled in pairs and his was always left empty. When they read aloud, the rain quieted like it too wanted to listen. Daniel pointed out what lived in each Emma's glare like teeth. Priya's glass breaking like laughter. Luis's empty seat heavier than a person. "These are truths," he said. "Don't hide them." Emma pretended to shrug it off, but inside she felt the sting of recognition someone had named the ghosts she carried and called them sentences worth saving. At lunch that day, the three of them stuck together again. Their corner table felt less like hiding and more like claiming. Priya scribbled lines between bites. Luis doodled guitars on his napkin. Emma leaned back and asked, "What happens when people find out about what Priya asked? That we're doing this? That a janitor is teaching us like some underground class?" Luis smirked. "Then we tell them it's invite only." But the truth arrived faster than they imagined. That Friday, as Emma opened her locker, a folded printout slid free and landed at her feet. It was a screenshot from Josh's phone, grainy but unmistakable. A picture of Daniel leaning over the workshop table, hands spread on the compass-scarred wood. Above it, Josh had scrawled in Sharpie, "The janitor's pets." A group of kids loitering near the vending machines burst out laughing. Emma's face went hot. Priya froze. Luis's fists clenched. "Don't," Emma muttered, seeing the fight building in Luis's jaw. She crumpled the paper and shoved it deep into her backpack. "He wants us to explode." "We won't," Priya's voice shook. "But now everyone knows." Emma took a breath and forced herself to remember the cardboard on the workshop wall. "Start at 0. Then let them know," she said, her voice steady. "We'll write better than they'll ever laugh." That afternoon, they returned to the East Wing with the tension thick in the air. Daniel was already waiting, mop leaning against the doorframe. He studied their faces and the way Priya's hands trembled as she opened her notebook. They found out Emma admitted. Josh posted a picture. Daniel didn't flinch. He just moved to the cardboard sign and underlined the word 0 with his marker until the cardboard nearly tore. "Then this is the test," he said quietly. "Do you stop because the world noticed, or do you keep going?" Emma's throat tightened, but she nodded. Luis opened his notebook. Priya steadied her pen. They chose to keep going. By Monday morning, Ridgeview High was buzzing with Josh Miller's stunt. The photo of Daniel and the 3 students had spread faster than Emma could have imagined. It was plastered on group chats, printed and taped to lockers, whispered about in the cafeteria. Everywhere she walked, she felt eyes on her, some mocking, some curious, all cutting. At her locker, 2 girls from the debate team walked past, giggling loud enough for her to hear. "Guess Billionaire's kids really do slum it sometimes," one sneered. "Maybe she'll get extra credit for learning how to scrub toilets," the other added, and they both burst into laughter. Emma's throat burned, but she didn't reply. She tightened her grip on the green notebook inside her bag, her lifeline to the one place that didn't feel suffocating. That afternoon, she stormed into the East Wing before anyone else. Daniel was wiping down a row of desks, his motions steady as always. She slammed the notebook on the table. "Do you even realize what's happening out there? They're laughing at me. At us." Daniel straightened slowly, resting his rag over the bucket. "And what are you going to do about it?" Her jaw dropped. "What am I I came here because I thought you were helping me, not making me the joke of the school. For the first time, his calm cracked his voice sharp as steel. Emma, you came here because you already were the joke, failing every test, drowning in excuses. Now you've got people's attention. What you do next decides whether they remember you for weakness or for fire. She froze, words lodging in her throat. Daniel rarely raised his voice. The weight of it pinned her. The door opened and Priya slipped in, clutching her books tighter than ever, eyes darting between them. Luis followed, expression, dark earbuds dangling from his hoodie. The air buzzed with tension. They know, Emma said bitterly. Good, Luis muttered, dropping into a chair. Now they'll watch when we prove them wrong. Priya hesitated, voice trembling. But what if we don't? Emma sank into her chair, suddenly aware of how fragile their little club was. One laugh, one cruel post, and the fragile safety they had built could crumble. Daniel picked up the battered stopwatch, set it on the desk, and pressed start. 10 minutes. Right about the moment you felt most ashamed. Don't pretty it up. Don't protect yourself. Just bleed it out. Priya's hand shook as she gripped her pen. Luis hunched low, jaw clenched. Emma stared at the blank page, her heart pounding. Slowly, her pen began to move. The moment my mom looked at me after another failed exam, and I saw it in her eyes, that flicker that said I was less, that I was a disappointment. I wanted to scream, but all I did was smile, like it didn't cut me open. By the time the timer beeped, Emma's eyes were wet. She slammed the notebook shut, wiping her face roughly. Priya wouldn't meet anyone's gaze. Luis looked like he might snap his pen in half. Daniel's voice was softer now. That's how you take back power. Not by pretending. By owning the wound until it belongs to you, not to them. For the first time, Emma didn't feel mocked by the cardboard sign on the wall. Start at zero wasn't an insult anymore, it was survival. That night, when she got home, Victoria Carter was waiting in the marble foyer, arms crossed. The house was cavernous, every sound echoing. I got a call, her mother said coldly. From the headmaster. He tells me you've been fraternizing with a janitor. Emma's heart dropped. It's not like that. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Do you have any idea what this does to our family's image, to my company's reputation? You are a Carter. You do not waste your time with the hired help. Emma's chest tightened, anger and shame warring inside her. She thought of Daniel's words about choosing fire over weakness. Maybe being a Carter is the problem, she blurted. The silence that followed was like glass shattering. Victoria's face paled, then hardened into something colder than stone. Go to your room, she said, voice trembling with restrained fury. And if I hear one more word of this nonsense, I'll have that man fired before the week is out. Emma fled upstairs, clutching the green notebook to her chest, as though it could shield her. She locked the door and sank onto her bed, her hands shaking. For the first time, she realized just how much was at stake, not just her reputation at school, but Daniel's job, his livelihood. The laughter in the hallways had been cruel enough, but her mother's threat made the notebook in her lap feel heavier than ever. Victoria Carter didn't drive herself often, but fury made poor company for chauffeurs. The rain had thinned to a mist by evening, the kind that painted the windshield with 1,000 restless pinpricks no wiper could quite erase. She took the turns toward Ridgeview on muscle memory, the Bentley's engine a low, barely leashed growl under her hands. The headmaster's call still rang in her ears, phrases like inappropriate boundaries and optics. She'd used those words her whole career to cut problems from the bone. Use the words right, and you never had to look anyone in the eye. She told herself she wasn't here to look anyone in the eye. The lot was mostly empty. Sodium lights hummed, throwing cones of pale orange over slick blacktop. A maintenance truck idled near the side entrance, its headlights off its cab glowing with the blue of a phone screen. The school's glass doors stood dark, riddled with exit signs flickering like distant buoys. Victoria killed the engine and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, the leather cool beneath her palms. She could march to the principal's office right now, demand an end to this nonsense, and have the janitor escorted out by morning. You didn't build an empire by asking twice. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A board member. Saw the post. Do you need me to handle this? She typed and erased 2 responses. The pregnant pause of indecision irritated her. She chose the safest lie. Evaluating, she wrote, more tomorrow. On the far side of the lot movement, a man stepped from the shadows of the east wing, a mop handle propped on his shoulder like a weary rifle. He held a backpack in one hand and a paper grocery bag in the other. A small figure trailed him, more shadow than child, a pink jacket bright against the drizzle. Victoria leaned forward. Daniel Cole set the mop carefully against the brick, then crouched to the child's level. The little girl stood pigeon-toed, one lace dragging in the wet. She looked up at him with the complete trust of someone who had never considered that an adult might drop her. He dropped the grocery bag on the curb and reached for her sneakers. "Foot," he said softly. The girl lifted one without question. He looped the lace, pulled double-knotted, then ran a thumb along the bow, the way a craftsman tests a joint. The jacket's hood fell back, and the girl laughed, the sound small and round and real enough to cut the last of the rain. Again she demanded, presenting the other foot with regal urgency. Again he agreed, which was the word Victoria had said to 100 teams in 100 meetings, and never once in that tone. The second shoelace was crooked. He didn't fix it. He tugged it without judgment and tapped her knee. "Good. Good." She sang, then lifted the paper bag and peered inside. "What's for dinner? Pasta. The cheap kind that pretends it's expensive if you add basil." He ruffled her hair. "We'll argue about homework while it boils." "You'll lose," she said with great authority. He laughed. "I always do." The exchange was so ordinary, so unmarketed, that Victoria's vision blurred for a second. She blinked hard and blamed the rain. Then the girl did something that unsettled her more than the laugh had she reached into the bag, pulled out a spiral notebook and a fistful of markers, and sat immediately on the curb to draw. The page bloomed with a circle. The letters around it were unsteady, the proportions wrong, but the intention was unmistakable. Start at 0. Victoria's mouth thinned. There it was, the phrase Emma had hurled at her like a dare, a commandment written by a child's hand on a wet curb, the world insisting on its meanings and refusing to ask permission from her. She could step out. She could cross the lot in her immaculate heels and announce herself and end this scene with a sentence. She imagined it, the man standing, the easy tenderness hardening into the employee neutrality. She knew how to dominate the child, hiding her drawing and learning in one instant to keep her gifts out of sight. The picture tasted like victory and ash. Victoria stayed in the car. It was ridiculous. She knew that to envy anyone in a faded uniform, to envy a cheap notebook and a crooked shoelace, and the absurd dignity of a paper bag with pasta inside. But envy came anyway, not for his life, but for how completely he seemed to be inhabiting it. Her mind tried to defend her. You provide 10,000 shoelaces to 10,000 kids every year. A familiar internal voice argued, listing donations and endowments and photographs with children that found their way into annual reports. It was a good voice, the voice that had saved her 100 times. It sounded thin against the rain and the small girl's laughter. Daniel slung the backpack over his shoulder, and picked up the mop again because the night didn't care that he had a daughter, or pasta, or joy. He walked toward the east wing, and the girl hopped along his shadow, counting his steps like a secret game. As they drew close to the doors, Victoria saw Emma's face inside the glass. Not the whole of it, just the pale oval of her daughter's reflection as she passed between shelves, her green notebook tucked under an arm. Emma paused for a heartbeat, turned as if sensing her mother's gaze through steel and glass and rain, then moved on. The door swung slowly shut behind her, a hush of hinge and rubber seal. Victoria's hand went to the door handle of the car before she could stop it. She could call out Emma and make a scene. She could call out Mr. Cole and make a point. She could call out to no one in particular and still own the air. Power was a habit. Power hated stillness. She didn't move. She watched. Inside the lobby's dim light, Daniel handed the mop to another custodian, and the two exchanged a wordless nod. Men who spoke a language of weight, transferred of hours logged, and floors to go. The girl raced ahead, shoes now soundless, as she crossed the old library threshold. She propped her drawing against a stack of green notebooks like it was a banner. Her circle wobbled, but it held. Victoria remembered Unwanted a night years ago when Emma was small, and shoelaces still confused her fingers. A nanny had knelt to tie them, while Victoria took a call about a lawsuit that could have gutted the company. Emma's eyes had been on Victoria the whole time, not the nanny, like a compass refusing to acknowledge the wrong north. The case had settled. The numbers had lined up. The board had applauded. The look in her daughter's eyes had not changed. "Damn it," Victoria whispered to the empty car. The word fogged the window and disappeared like a promise she couldn't keep. Her phone buzzed again. Her general counsel efficient as always. "We can file a complaint with facilities to remove him from student areas. Document trail matters if there's blowback." She typed with brutal automatic speed. "Draft it. Hold for my signature." Her finger hovered over send. Outside, the girl lifted her drawing toward Daniel, bouncing on her toes. He bent to look at it with the full attention of a person who had nothing more important to be doing. His eyebrows lifted. "We've got ourselves a logo," he said. The girl beamed like he had hung the moon with a paperclip. Victoria set the phone face down on the passenger seat. She climbed out of the Bentley and into the mist, the air cool and medicinal. Rain tapped her coat with polite fingers and then forgot her. She took 2 steps toward the east wing and stopped. The sound inside pens scratching a small voice. Reading something brave. A boy clearing his throat and not quitting carried through the old vents. If she opened the door, the sound would change to accommodate her. Rooms always changed when she entered them. She could not remember the last time she had wondered what a room sounded like without her. She stepped backward, a small retreat almost no one would recognize as such, and walked along the side of the building, instead letting her hand trail over the damp brick. A thin light blinked behind a wired glass window, the kind you couldn't see cleanly through. The distortion made it easier somehow to admit that she did not understand what she was seeing. When she reached the far corner, she stopped where a trash can overflowed with white cardboard circles, the cores of tape rolls spent and hollow. She picked one up without thinking, a circle with nothing inside. She turned it in her hand, the paper going soft under the rain, and thought absurdly of targets and halos and holes. Start at 0. A circle wasn't nothing, it was a shape you could hold. Her phone buzzed again, insistent. She silenced it, slid it into her coat pocket, and with an impulse she would later call strategic, but knew in this moment was simply human, walked back to the Bentley. She did not drive away. She sat and watched the door. Daniel emerged an hour later with the girl asleep on his shoulder, her mouth slightly open, one fist still wrapped around a marker. He shifted her gently into the truck's cab and buckled her in with tenderness that made Victoria want to look away. He fetched the grocery bag and the mop last. He moved like every object mattered because it was part of their life, not because it cost anything. He closed the passenger door softly so as not to wake the girl, then stood with his hands on the roof, rain ticking against his knuckles. He looked out across the lot toward nothing in particular. A man measuring the space between what he had and what he had lost. And then he smiled to himself, small and private and real, and climbed in. Victoria started the Bentley only when his taillights had become a rumor. She drove home through streets that knew her schedule and traffic lights that seemed to prefer her. In the garage, she stopped the car and didn't get out for a full minute. The house lights had been turned on for her. The hallway would smell faintly of lemon and the suggestion of dinner she would not taste. She saw herself move through it, like a figure on a glossy page, sharp suit, correct nods, the hum of competence around a machine of a life. Upstairs in her study, the glass desk reflected her like a second, flatter woman. She set the phone down, opened the drawer where she kept contracts, and things more fragile than contracts, and then shut it again before the papers inside could accuse her. She pressed her palms flat on the desk until the cool bled into her skin. When she finally did pick up the phone, the draft to remove him from student areas still glowed. She deleted it. In its place, she wrote to the headmaster, "I want to see the space they're using. Schedule time. I need to understand the scope before we act." The message was all caution and plausible deniability. It was also the least she could do to buy one day. From the hallway, the ghost of a child's voice, years old and stubborn, rose in her mind. Again. Tie the lace again. Try again. Love again. Victoria clicked off the study lights and stood in the doorway listening to the house settle. Somewhere behind the walls, the heating system sighed. Somewhere else, a girl with wet shoes had drawn a circle and called it the beginning. In the morning, she would be Victoria Carter again, immaculate and certain and devastating in meetings. Tonight, she allowed herself to admit what the headlights and the rain had shown her, that tenderness was a power she had never bothered to learn, and that it frightened her precisely because it did not obey. She turned toward the hall that led to Emma's room and stopped halfway. Some rooms change when you enter them. Some change you if you wait outside long enough. She chose for once to wait. Morning at Ridgeview had its own rhythm lockers slamming like drum sneakers squeaking across tile, voices bouncing off walls too old to absorb them. But in the East Wing library, the rhythm slowed. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, dust dancing like confetti in the air. It was the kind of light that made even silence feel alive. Daniel Cole pushed open the double doors with his shoulder balancing two cardboard boxes filled with notebooks and mismatched pencils. His daughter trailed him swinging her arms like she was conducting the day. Inside, Emma Carter sat cross-legged on the floor, her notebook open across her knees. She glanced up, trying for aloofness, but her hand betrayed her. She'd already filled 2 full pages with circles and numbers, practice marks scrawled over and over. "You're early," Daniel said, setting the boxes down with a grunt. Emma shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." His daughter dropped her backpack with a thud and announced, "She wants to beat you." Daniel chuckled. "Does she now?" He squatted down so his eyes met Emma's. "You don't need to beat me, kid. You just need to beat yourself from yesterday." Emma's mouth quirked at the corner, caught between defiance and the faintest smile. The library smelled of old pages and floor polish, of rain still drying on the windowsills. Desks had been pulled into a loose circle, a whiteboard leaned against a wall, a stray squeak of marker from last night still visible. On the board in crooked letters, someone had written again, "Start at 0." Daniel clapped his hands. "All right, circle up. Today isn't about numbers, it's about voices. You're going to read, out loud." Groans and eye rolls came from the half-dozen kids gathering in the room. They were the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones Ridgeview cataloged as average. They slouched in chairs braced for embarrassment. Emma's face reddened. She lowered her gaze to the open book in her lap. "I can't," she whispered. Daniel heard it, but didn't call her out. He simply picked a thin paperback from the box and handed it to another boy. "You start. Doesn't matter if you stumble." The boy read a line, then faltered. Another girl picked up where he left off, voice cracking. A third carried it further, and soon the halting words passed around the circle like a fragile ball. Nobody wanted to drop. When it came to Emma, the silence pressed heavy. Her hands tightened on the notebook. "Skip me," she muttered. Daniel crouched at her side. "Emma." She shook her head. "Tell you what," he said. Softly, voice steady. "Don't think of it as reading to us. Think of it as reading to her." He nodded at his daughter, who was busy drawing crooked stars in the corner of her page. Emma swallowed. "That's worse." His daughter looked up, all blunt honesty. "You're scared." Emma bristled. "I'm not scared." "Then prove it," the little girl said, folding her arms. Daniel hid his smile. The kid had inherited his stubborn streak. Emma lifted her notebook. The letters trembled, but her voice cracked out, barely audible at first. "The sun sets behind the—" She faltered. Daniel leaned closer, his presence calm. Again. She tried. "The sun sets behind the hills." Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. By the third sentence, something shifted. The words tumbled rough but steady. Her cheeks flushed with effort. She reached the end of the page, and for a moment silence reigned. Then his daughter clapped. 1, 2, 3. The others joined in the sound, clumsy but real. Emma stared at them as if she didn't recognize the applause belonged to her. For the first time in months, she wasn't failing a test, she was part of something. Daniel stood his voice firm. "See, you didn't start perfect. You started at 0. And 0's where everything begins." Outside the library, Victoria Carter watched through the wired glass, her reflection fractured. She had told the headmaster she needed to see the scope before signing off on any decision. But as she watched her daughter's shoulders square, watched her read without the shame that usually strangled her, Victoria's scope narrowed to one simple, unbearable truth. Emma was alive in this room in a way she wasn't anywhere else. Mrs. Carter, the headmaster, whispered beside her, arms folded. "You see why it's concerning. Liability, unauthorized use of school space." Victoria didn't answer right away. She couldn't. The applause still echoed in her ears. Inside, Emma lifted her chin, her voice gathering strength. The stars began to appear one by one. Victoria's throat tightened. She had bought stars for Emma Crystal Ceiling's domed observatories, diamonds that sparkled under curated light. None of it had ever made her daughter glow like this. Daniel noticed Victoria in the window then, their eyes locked. For a moment his expression hardened, protective, wary. Then it softened just enough for her to see something she hadn't been shown in years, respect that didn't need her money, only her choice. She exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the glass. Then she turned to the headmaster. Not a word of this leaves this hallway. Not yet. He blinked. So you want him removed? No. She adjusted her coat, her tone brooking no argument. I want to watch. Back inside, Emma stumbled on a word and corrected herself without Daniel's help. She grinned wide and unguarded. His daughter clapped again, delight ringing through the room. For the first time in her career, Victoria Carter didn't calculate what came next. She simply stood in a hallway that smelled faintly of chalk and dust and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, starting at zero wasn't a weakness, it was the only way forward. By the end of that week, whispers about the secret study circle weren't whispers anymore. Ridgeview was a hothouse of gossip, and Emma Carter's sudden change, her eyes brighter, her hand darting up in class more often, was fuel for every tongue. Teachers noticed too. When Ms. Franklin returned a graded essay with a red B scrawled across the top, instead of the usual failing mark, Emma nearly forgot to breathe. You've improved, Ms. Franklin said, with a raised brow, as if still suspicious of how. Emma tucked the paper quickly into her folder. Just trying harder, she muttered. In the East Wing library, the circle of chairs filled faster each day. Luis had started showing up before Daniel, dragging the heavy desks into place with a muttered, might as well get it over with. Priya brought thermoses of tea for everyone, setting them down with shy care. Emma arrived early too, her notebook clutched like a talisman. That Friday, Daniel leaned against the whiteboard, arms crossed. His daughter twirled on one of the chairs, humming. Today, Daniel announced, we fail on purpose. Luis groaned. What kind of twisted pep talk is that? You're going to stand up here, each of you, and make as many mistakes as possible, Daniel explained. Mess up words, miss questions, say the wrong answer, and everyone else will clap for you because failure is practice. No shame, just steps. Emma stared at him like he was joking, but one by one the others tried. Luis purposely butchered a math problem, the wrong numbers tumbling out, and Priya actually clapped until her palms turned pink. Priya herself mispronounced 3 words in a row, and Emma found herself laughing not cruelly, but with relief. When it was Emma's turn, her knees shook. She stood in front of the circle, clutching her notebook. Okay, she said, voice wobbly. Abraham Lincoln was the first president of the United States. Luis booed loudly, then clapped even louder. Priya giggled. Daniel's daughter shouted, "Good mistake!" Emma bit her lip, then blurted, "The capital of France is Madrid." The circle erupted in cheers. Something in her chest cracked open. She threw her arms wide and shouted, 2 + 2 = 5. The kids roared with laughter, pounding their desks. For once, Emma didn't feel like the butt of the joke. She was in on it. Daniel raised his hands for quiet. See, failing doesn't kill you. Fear of failing does. Every test, every essay, every answer, start at 0, fail forward. That's how you learn. Emma sat down, cheeks flushed, heart hammering, but not with shame, with something closer to joy. Later that night, at the Carter mansion, Victoria returned late from a board meeting. She found Emma in the kitchen, hunched over her notebook, muttering equations under her breath. The marble counters glowed under recessed lights, but Emma's world was the lined paper in front of her. You're studying, Victoria said flatly. Emma didn't look up. Yeah, with him. Emma's pencil slowed. With him. With them. It's not what you think. Victoria crossed the room, heels sharp against the tile. She placed her manicured hand over the notebook, forcing Emma to meet her eyes. You are a Carter. Carters don't start at 0. We buy our way past it. Emma jerked the notebook back, her voice trembling. Then maybe I don't want to be a Carter. The words hung in the cavernous kitchen like a bell strike. Victoria's breath caught, but her face hardened. She turned sharply, leaving Emma alone with the quiet hum of the refrigerator. In her bedroom that night, Emma clutched the notebook to her chest. She remembered the roar of laughter in the library, the applause after every mistake. She thought of Daniel's calm voice. Fail forward. For the first time in her life, she chose. She chose 0. And she didn't feel small at all. The summons came on school letterhead, polite font, sharp edges. Daniel found it taped to the handle of his mop bucket when he rolled it out of the supply closet. That afternoon. Please report to Principal Hayes' main office, 3:10 p.m. No signature, just the building's crest and a line that might as well have read, "We saw you." He folded the paper once, then again, then slid it into his back pocket. When he looked up, Emma was in the library doorway, green notebook tucked under her arm. "You got it too?" she asked, trying to sound bored and failing. He shook his head. "Just me." Her jaw shifted. "Then I'm coming." "No," he said, gentle but immovable. "You're writing. Daniel." He reached out and touched the cardboard sign on the wall. "Start at 0 like it was a light switch. You can't stop a room from changing when people in suits walk in," he said. "You can decide whether the work changes." She swallowed. "What if they shut us down?" He held her gaze a beat longer than was comfortable. "Then we write in the margins." At 3:10, the main office hummed with the end-of-day chaos, phones ringing, a secretary shuffling bus passes, the machine by the door spitting late slips like white confetti. Principal Hayes' tall khaki stiff tie, a shade too proud, stood in his doorway with a folder under one arm. Beside him, the head of facilities leaned on the counter, like he owned the building because his keys could open any door. Ms. Delgado, guidance counselor, had a seat near the ficus and looked like she would rather be anywhere else. Victoria Carter did not sit. She stood at the window, arms folded, face set, watching the dismissal traffic crawl. "Mr. Cole," Hayes said, stepping back to allow Daniel into the office. "Close the door, please." Daniel did. The latch clicked tidy and final. "This is a courtesy meeting," Hayes began, flipping open the folder. "You've been volunteering informal academic support to students during non-instructional hours." "Working with them," Daniel said. He didn't sit. "Working," Hayes repeated carefully. "Without authorization, without certification, without a curriculum approved by this institution. We have to consider liability. Kids from my caseload are in that circle," Ms. Delgado said quietly, not looking at Victoria. "They are safer in that room than in most places in this building. It's not a club, it's a lifeline." Facilities coughed. "We got concerns about an employee using the East Wing for anything but custodial duty. Insurance, too. And there's the matter of optics," Hayes added, and the word hung heavy in the air. "A circulating photo of a custodian running what looks like an unsanctioned class. The community." "What community?" Ms. Delgado cut in heat, rising in her voice. "The kids who never see themselves on the brochures?" Hayes's look told her to fall back. Victoria's expression didn't change. She might as well have been carved from the window frame, except Daniel saw just for a second the way her fingers tensed against her elbows. "We are placing you on temporary suspension from any mentoring activity," Hayes said, at last, voice turning official. "You will continue in your custodial role. You will cease meeting with students, effective immediately. Suspension." Daniel repeated, tasting the word like a chipped tooth. He nodded once. "Understood." Emma burst in then, because of course she had her ear to the door. The secretary reached too late for the handle. Emma was already there, cheeks flushed, notebook clutched like evidence. "You can't do this," she said. Eyes locked on Hayes, then flicking to her mother. "He's the only reason I'm passing anything," Emma Victoria warned, tone low. "Not here. No, Mom. Here." She stepped further into the office, planting her feet on the cheap carpet like a claim. "You want optics? Here's one. Your daughter failing in public until a man pushing a mop gave her a way to breathe." Hayes stiffened. Facilities stared at a spot over her head. Ms. Delgado's hands twisted in her lap. Daniel put a hand on Emma's shoulder pressure, just enough to anchor, not enough to restrain. "It's okay," he said. "This isn't our fight. It is..." she said, voice cracking. It's my life. He absorbed that, then looked at Hayes. Do I need to turn in keys? Hayes hesitated. Power liked when the other person flinched. Daniel wasn't. Keys to the library for now, Hayes said, fishing a manila envelope from a drawer. Daniel reached into his pocket and set 2 tarnished keys on the desk. They made a lonely sound on the wood. He didn't look at Victoria. He didn't look away from her either. Something passed between them. Recognition may be the kind that flares when 2 people realize they are both choosing less than what they could take. Mr. Cole Hayes said, relief seeping into his tone now that the ritual had a shape. I appreciate your cooperation. Daniel nodded once. I appreciate their courage, he said, tipping his head toward the door, toward whichever kids were out there right now thinking a hallway might swallow them whole. He guided Emma out with him. In the reception area, Priya and Luis were waiting like they'd been holding their breath for 10 minutes. Priya's eyes were already wet. Luis stared at the envelope in Daniel's hand as if it contained a verdict. Well, Luis asked. Daniel held up the envelope. I'm benched. Priya made a sound like a gasp folded into a sob. Emma stepped between Daniel and the world, ready to make herself into a wall. We can fight this, she said. We can, my mom? She looked back through the glass at Victoria, still and precise as a chess piece that moved only when it meant to win. No one fights better than paperwork, Daniel said, and there was no bitterness in it, only fatigue. But paper can't stop a pen that knows where it's going. What does that even mean? Luis asked, half mad, half desperate. It means this isn't church. Daniel's voice was quiet and firm, like the floors under their feet. Your writing doesn't need a priest to make it holy. It doesn't need applause. It needs you in a chair with 10 honest minutes and the guts to hate the first draft. Emma blinked fast. Say you'll come anyway. Say you'll keep meeting us, please. He looked at her at the green notebook with its edges softened by hands, at the girl who had walked in with sunglasses as armor and now stood with nothing but her raw voice and a circle of kids. He could have said yes and meant it and lost his job by morning. He could have said no and watched her crumble in a way he might not be able to fix later. Right, he said instead. Just the one word. You keep writing. I don't need to be in the room for that to be true. His daughter Lily trotted up then from where she'd been coloring in a chair by the copier, oblivious to the adult weather. Dad? I drew another circle, she announced, holding it up. The O was wildly lopsided. The letters around it staggered, but brave. Start at 0, it said again, as if the world might forget. Daniel smiled at her, and the smile cracked something in Emma's chest. Looks like a revolution, he said. They walked together down the hallway, Emma, Priya, Luis, Lily skipping between them. Daniel a half step behind, like a shepherd counting heads. Teachers passed, not seeing. Josh leaned against a locker and flicked his eyes over the group like they were a headline he'd already mocked. Where's your mop club now? He stage whispered. 2 of his friends snickered. Emma stopped. Every cell in her body prepared for the old combustion, but the cardboard words were louder than the sneer. Right here, she said, tapping her temple with the end of her pen. Right here, she repeated, tapping the green notebook. She met Josh's gaze. You can't suspend that. Josh opened his mouth for the next line and then somehow lost it. Emma turned and kept moving. Back in the library, the circle of chairs looked wrong without Daniel leaning on the windowsill, thermos in hand. The room felt a size too big. Emma stood where he usually did. 10 minutes, she said, throat tight. Write the first sentence you're afraid to admit is yours. Luis looked at the whiteboard. The marker squeaked under his hand. Fail forward. Priya set the timer on her phone and slid it face down under the table exactly the way Daniel taught them. Lily took her place by the cardboard sign and drew another crooked O inside the first, a second circle like a promise. They wrote, not better than before, not braver, not cleaner, just as if the act itself were the point. Words tumbled clumsy and alive, and the room began to feel like itself again, just slightly rearranged to make space for the empty that his absence made. When the timer chirped, no one moved right away. Luis said, I hate this. Priya said, me too. Emma said, good, surprising herself with the steadiness of it. She swallowed. Means it's working. At home that night, the Carter mansion sounded like a museum again, quiet, curated to make you feel small. Emma sat cross-legged on her rug, the green notebook open to a blank page that looked like a dare. She tried to write about what had happened, and the sentences came out like apologies. She tore the page free and started over. If the world only listens to titles, she wrote slowly, maybe the only way to be heard is to erase mine. She stopped and stared at the line. It scared her. It comforted her. It felt like stepping to the very edge of the tile and looking over into the dark. Down the hall, Victoria stood in her study with the lights-off phone glowing cold in her palm. Hayes had sent a follow-up suspension enacted. Monitoring continues. Appreciate your discretion. Her thumb hovered over reply. Instead, she opened the photo she'd taken through the wired glass that morning. Emma's face lit with the kind of effort money couldn't fake. She enlarged it until the pixels climbed apart a mosaic of a girl she had made and could not control. She put the phone down and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside alphabet charts, a text-to-speech device she hadn't switched on in years, a large print novel with the spine barely cracked. She touched them and then let go as if they were hot. In the East Wing. Long after the building emptied and the automatic lights cut out, Daniel walked the hallway with a push broom instead of a mop, the old school smell rising in waves. He paused by the library door and laid his palm against the cool glass. On the other side, cardboard letters waited in the dark. He whispered, not sure if he was praying or promising, start at 0, and then kept sweeping because the floor needed him, and so did a dozen kids who thought they were alone until a circle made them otherwise. Tomorrow, he wouldn't be in the room, but the work would be. Night draped the Carter mansion like a velvet curtain, muffling the house's expensive quiet until even the grandfather clock seemed to breathe softer. Emma padded down the hallway barefoot, the green notebook tucked under her arm, her phone's flashlight making a pale cone across the runner. She should have been asleep tomorrow, promised a full day of whispers and side-eyes in the wake of Daniel's suspension, but the sentence she'd written before bed wouldn't let her rest. If the world only listens to titles, maybe the only way to be heard is to erase mine. The words pulsed like a bruise. She needed a printer to tape them above her desk, needed to see them in black and white, the way you see a dare more clearly when you stick it to a wall. The family printer lived in her mother's study, Victoria's sanctum, the one room in the house that made even staff speak with indoor voices. The door stood ajar, a thin blade of light cutting the dark. Emma hesitated. She could hear the soft shush of the HVAC and the almost inaudible tick of the glass desk clock her mother pretended not to care about. She tapped the notebook against her thigh once, twice, then pushed the door with 2 fingers. It swung without protest. The study gleamed the way magazines taught rooms to gleam, a glass desk the size of a car. Hood, a wall of books arranged by color instead of subject, a floating shelf with awards that weighed more than they looked. But what always ruined the illusion were the drawers. Victoria kept them locked during the day, guarded as if they contained stock options instead of pens. Tonight, the bottom left one sat cocked open by an inch of misalignment that would have enraged Victoria's sense of symmetry. "Mom?" Emma whispered, peeking around the door. No answer. The house sighed. She crossed to the printer, but her feet stopped at the open drawer the way your eyes stop at a siren-loud word. Curiosity and dread tangled in her chest. She slid the drawer open with her fingertips slow, as if she were disarming something. Inside a tray of laminated alphabet cards in bright primary colors. ABBCC in block print. Below them a text-to-speech device the size of a paperback, its buttons worn smooth. Thick pencils with triangular grips. A pack of colored overlays, transparent sheets in pale blues and greens and ambers. And on the bottom, half hidden under a folder, a large print edition of a classic novel, the pages yellowed, the type so big it looked like shouting. Emma froze. It didn't make sense until it made so much sense she had to sit down. She lowered herself into the leather chair, the notebook slipping onto her lap. Her mind rearranged certain memories, like furniture, finally admitting where it belonged, the way Victoria read contracts aloud under her breath, when she thought no one was listening, how she never asked Emma to read the menu in a restaurant, always treating her by ordering, the strange, rigid pride she had in memorizing presentations instead of relying on notes. Emma picked up one of the overlays. The plastic felt flimsy, cheap against her fingers, the kind of thing a teacher might pass to a kid no one had time to understand. She laid it over a page of the large print novel. The letters softened, settled. Her own breath hitched. She reached for the text-to-speech device and thumbed the on switch. A tinny voice, genderless and precise, bled into the room. Chapter 1. Emma snapped it off as if she'd intruded on a secret so intimate that sound itself was an offense. She stared at the drawer like it might snap shut and erase the evidence. But it sat there stubbornly open, full of artifacts that told one story in 10 different dialects. Her mother wasn't perfect at everything. Her mother, Victoria Carter, who stitched a company together with iron thread and a smile sharp enough to open envelopes, had trouble with letters. Had always had trouble with letters. Had built an empire around that trouble so no one would see it. Emma felt something hot sting the backs of her eyes. Not anger exactly. Though anger was there like an old friend, more like a sudden fierce empathy crashing into the scaffolding of all her grudges at once. How many dinners had turned into tribunals, not because her mother loved cruelty, but because fear had been sitting at the table longer than Emma had been alive. The house shifted, settling, or maybe exhaling. Emma picked up the laminated alphabet cards and fanned them, a child's rainbow in her hand. Her throat went tight. She thought of 10-year-old Emma trying to tie her shoes while a nanny's precise fingers did the work, and of another girl tonight on a curb in the rain, a man in a faded uniform double-knotting her laces with patient pride. 2 different knelt postures, 2 different kinds of love. One of them had kept its softness. The other had put on armor and never taken it off. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered to no one, to the drawer to the room that had always been too clean to trust. She slid the drawer shut gently and stood. The printer blinked at her like a docile animal waiting for commands. Suddenly, she didn't want anything printed in here at all. She turned to leave and stopped. Another drawer top, right this time, sat locked. Emma pressed her palm to the cool wood, feeling foolish and 19 and 12 at once. She tugged. It held. She exhaled and forced herself toward the door. In the hallway, her feet slowed near the framed family photo. The last one before her father left Victoria's smile perfect, and a little brittle Emma, small in a white dress, her eyes searching sideways for something that wasn't there yet. The glass reflected her now older and messier hair, up in a lopsided knot, a smear of ink across one knuckle. The 2 versions of her shared the same space for a heartbeat. She didn't know which one she pitied. Back in her room, she closed the door quietly and sat on the floor under the window the way she always did when she needed truth to feel like gravity instead of a trap. She flipped open the green notebook to a new page and wrote without thinking. "My mother built palaces so no one would see the staircase she falls down at night." She stared at the sentence. She hadn't known that was waiting in her wrist until it was there in ink. The next line came slower. "Maybe she pushed me so hard not because she loved perfection, but because she feared I had inherited her war. Inherited the war." The phrase hit her in the sternum. She thought about the way her mother had said Carters don't start at 0, and how the alphabet cards had sat there in the drawer like an altar to 0 used in the dark. She wanted to be furious. It would be easier. But the image of the text-to-speech voice, flat, tinny, reliable in a way human voices never are, kept dragging her back to something like sorrow. For the first time in months, she wanted to walk down the hall and knock on her mother's door and say, "Tell me. Tell me how the letters tilt for you, how they slip, how you catch them, and hold them still like butterflies you can't bear to pin." A light passed under her door. She held her breath. Footsteps paused outside heels without their full armor, slower at night, thoughtful. Emma's hand trembled over the notebook, ready to snap it closed. The footsteps moved on. She pressed her palm flat to the page and breathed until her heart settled into something that didn't sound like panic. Then she wrote carefully. "If we both start at 0, maybe we stop trying to own each other's miles." A sudden memory rose up, uninvited Emma, at 7, sitting at the long dining table with a children's chapter book. Victoria had stood behind her, one hand on the back of the chair, like a captain's, the other hand tracing the lines with a pencil. Slower, she'd said when Emma tried to skip the hard words. "No, see it, don't pretend it." At the time, Emma had heard it as cruelty. Maybe it had been a message passed down from one frightened girl to another, with too much steel added in transit. Downstairs somewhere deep in the house, A cabinet door clicked and soft jazz lifted like steam. Her mother never slept on nights that smelled like decisions. On those nights, Victoria moved through the study like a ghost employing a body, reading contracts out loud, letting the syllables do their work in the air, even when the page refused to pay her the courtesy of lying flat in her head. Emma stood again before she could talk herself out of it. She opened her door and stepped into the hall, the notebook tucked against her ribs like a shield. She made it 5 steps toward the study and stopped. The slice of light under Victoria's door was enough to make her throat close. "Not tonight," a voice in her said. "Not because you're afraid, but because you finally know this is bigger than a midnight confessional." Daniel's voice threaded in after it, low and patient. "The right thing never begs for applause. Keep laying down the words." She returned to her room and sat once more. She copied the line she'd written before if the world only listens to titles. And then under it, bold and deliberate, added, "Start at 0 was never an insult. It's permission." She closed the notebook and pressed it to her chest until the paper warmed. Then she slid it under her pillow like a child might hide a treasure and lay back, eyes on the ceiling's dim geometry. Sleep took a long time to find her. When it did, it threaded her dreams with low voices at a library door, a curved shoelace resting against a small sneaker, a deck of alphabet cards that refused to stay hidden in a drawer. In the morning, she would not be able to unknow what she had learned. In the morning, she would ask. She would not let Victoria rewrite the night into something tidy. But for now, while the house held the last of its quiet and the sky beyond her window softened toward gray, Emma let the truth sit without trying to weaponize it. It felt like holding a bowl with both hands. Across the hall, Victoria stood in her study with the lights off. Eyes closed, fingertips resting on the edge of the same drawer Emma had touched. She had not heard the device speak, had not seen the cards go out and back. But some rooms change you if you wait outside long enough, and tonight on either side of a hall built for distance, a mother and a daughter kept company with the same secret. Tomorrow, they would test whether it could turn into a bridge. The next morning broke with a sharp wind off the river, rattling the windows of Ridgeview Academy like an omen. Emma walked through the gates with her chin tucked into her collar, the green notebook heavy in her bag, the memory of the open drawer pressing against her ribs like a bruise. By first period, the air was already thick. Daniel was gone, suspended indefinitely. The students in the secret circle carried themselves like half a body without its spine. Luis slouched so deep into his hoodie he looked folded in half, and Priya traced invisible circles on her desk, as if sketching the words she couldn't say aloud. Even Emma's smile, which had begun to bloom in those weeks of failure practice, wilted at the edges. Ms. Franklin handed back another test. Emma saw the grade before she even pulled the paper all the way free, 74 scrawled in red. Not a miracle, but not failure either. She slid the test under her notebook before the class hawks could crane their necks. When the bell rang, Luis muttered, "He's not coming back, is he?" Emma glanced at him, and her voice came out sharper than she intended. "Of course he is." Priya lifted her eyes, worried. "Your mom doesn't lose." Emma thought of the drawer, of the overlays, the oversized type, of the truth she couldn't tell anyone yet. Maybe she's not the one fighting. This time, Emma said half to herself. That afternoon, the library was emptier than ever. The janitorial cart stood parked in its usual corner, but Daniel's absence turned it into a gravestone instead of a landmark. The kids shuffled into their circle like soldiers reporting to duty without an officer. For a long minute, no one spoke. Finally, Emma dropped her bag onto the floor with a thud. "We keep going," Luis snorted. "Doing what? Pretending we're teachers?" Emma pulled the notebook out and slapped it on the desk. "He didn't teach us to pretend. He taught us to fail forward. We don't stop just because someone's scared of him." Priya's soft voice threaded the air. "What if we're scared too?" Emma looked at them both. Her fingers itched to write, but instead she let the words fall raw. "Then we start at 0. Again." The silence shifted. Not gone, but rearranged. Emma flipped open the notebook to a fresh page. "Okay, let's screw up together." She wrote a math problem on the board badly. Luis groaned but picked up the marker next, his mistake making the others laugh. Priya stumbled through a poem line by line, the rhythm clumsy and awkward, and Emma clapped so hard her palms stung. They were shaky, clumsy, without Daniel's calm voice anchoring them, but they were still moving. That night, Emma came home to find her mother waiting at the kitchen island laptop, closed glass of wine untouched. Victoria rarely waited. She was the one people waited for. The air itself seemed caught in her posture. "Word reached me, you've been running something in the library," she said without preamble. Emma froze the notebook still in her hand. "We're just studying." Victoria's eyes flicked to the green cover. With him, Emma's jaw tightened. Without him now. "Thanks to you." The silence stretched brittle as glass. Victoria finally exhaled, her voice quieter. "Do you even know who he is? That man is not what he seems." Emma thought of the drawer, of secrets people carried so carefully they cut their hands on the edges. "Neither are you," she said. Her mother's eyes narrowed, hurt and anger braided together. "Excuse me." Emma set the notebook down with deliberate care. Her hands shook, but she held her ground. "You act like I'm broken because I don't meet your impossible standards. But maybe you're just afraid I'll see you're not perfect either." Victoria's lips parted, then closed again. Her knuckles whitened on the stem of her wineglass, though she didn't lift it. For a flicker of a second, Emma thought she saw something naked and human pass across her mother's face, but it vanished, replaced by armor. "You don't understand what it costs to build this life," Victoria said finally. Emma's voice dropped. "Then show me." They stood locked across the island, two Carters with different wars coiled under their skin. Neither moved first. Later, alone in her room, Emma opened her notebook again. She wrote one sentence steady, despite her trembling hand. "Zero isn't the absence of power. It's the beginning of honesty." When she closed the notebook this time, it didn't feel like hiding. It felt like sharpening a blade she wasn't ready to use, but knew she would. The following week at Ridgeview felt like walking through molasses. Every class dragged every whisper in the hallway, seemed to circle back to Daniel's name, and Emma carried the weight of her secret like a stone in her backpack. The circle still met in the library, though it wasn't the same. They laughed at their mistakes, stumbled through equations, read passages with clumsy rhythm, but there was a hollow space where Daniel's steady voice should have been. On Thursday afternoon, just as Emma was finishing a particularly messy sketch of a poem on the board, a shadow fell across the glass door. Everyone froze. The handle turned. It wasn't Daniel. It was Principal Harris, flanked by two teachers. His expression was cold, his voice clipped. "This stops now." Luis tried to protest, but Harris cut him off. "The library is for supervised study only, not whatever this is." He gestured at the scrawled words and diagrams on the board like they were graffiti. Emma felt heat climb her neck. She wanted to yell that they were learning more here than in any classroom, but the words caught in her throat. The teacher swept the room with suspicious eyes before leaving. Harris stayed a beat longer, his gaze on Emma. "I know you think you're protecting him, but he's gone. And if you keep this up, you'll go down with him." The door shut. The circle dissolved in uneasy silence. That night, Emma lay awake staring at her ceiling, Daniel's words echoing, "The right thing never begs for applause." She thought of the drawer in her mother's study, the overlays, the text-to-speech device, a lifetime of hiding. By morning, her decision had hardened. She found Daniel not at the school, but in the park across from the bus stop where she knew he waited after his shifts. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, his uniform faded from too many washes. But when he saw her, he smiled the kind of smile that said he'd been expecting her even if he hadn't. "Emma," he said, "you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," she shot back, then softer. "They're falling apart without you." He shook his head. "They'll be fine. You're stronger than you think." Emma pulled out the green notebook and held it out to him. "Not without this." He didn't take it. His eyes lingered on the frayed edges, then on her. "That's yours now." She clenched the notebook tighter. "You don't get it. Harris is breathing down our necks. My mom." She cut herself off. She wasn't ready to share the drawer yet. "She's making sure you don't come back. And I can't keep holding this by myself." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. The traffic behind them hummed, a dog barked somewhere in the distance. Finally, he spoke. "Emma starting at zero means carrying the weight until you're strong enough to lift it. You're not supposed to do it alone, but you can't give it back to me either. You have to decide whether to drop it or keep walking with it." Her throat tightened. She wanted him to take the notebook to tell her what to do to fix everything. Instead, he was handing her the kind of choice that burned in your palms. A gust of wind fluttered the pages, and a sheet tore loose, skittering across the sidewalk. Daniel caught it before it could fly away. He glanced down and froze. It wasn't just any page. It was the one Emma had written after discovering the drawer. The sentence stared back at both of them. "My mother built palaces so no one would see the staircase she falls down at night." Daniel's eyes lifted, searching hers. Emma's face burned. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say anything." He didn't. He folded the page carefully as if it were glass and handed it back. But his voice carried a new weight when he spoke. "Secrets break us more than failure ever will. When you're ready, you'll know what to do with this." Emma shoved the page back into the notebook, her heart hammering. She hated that he saw her secret, but she hated more how relieved she felt that someone else carried even a corner of it now. They sat on the bench for a while in silence. When Emma finally stood, Daniel said only one thing. "Whatever happens, remember 0 isn't where you stop. It's where you begin again." She walked home with the notebook pressed to her chest, the folded page whispering inside it like a loaded chamber. At dinner, Victoria was uncharacteristically quiet, her eyes on her glass of water instead of her daughter. Emma almost blurted everything about the circle, about Daniel, about the drawer, but the words caught on the barbed wire of fear between them. Instead, she said nothing. Later that night, she slid the folded page out, smoothed it flat, and pinned it to her wall above her desk. The words stared back in the dim lamplight palaces. Staircase at night. For the first time, Emma felt like the wall wasn't just decoration. It was a challenge. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow I stop pretending. Friday arrived with an edge, the kind of brittle cold that made every sound carry sharper through the halls of Ridgeview. Emma stepped through the glass doors, the green notebook tucked under her arm, her chest tight with a decision she hadn't dared to say out loud even to herself. The whispers hit her before she reached her locker. "That's her," someone hissed. "The Carter girl who hangs out with the janitor." Emma kept her eyes forward, fingers trembling as she spun the lock. The metal clanged too loud in the hush, and she bit her lip until the copper taste of blood steadied her. Luis caught up to her by second period. His hood was pulled low, his voice pitched tight. "He's not coming back, Emma. Harris is done with him. Your mom, too." "Everyone says he's finished." Emma snapped her locker shut. "Then we're not finished." Luis shook his head. "You're crazy. This isn't just about failing forward anymore. They're coming for us." She glanced down the hall where Harris stood speaking to 2 board members, his eyes flicking toward her like a hawk's. "Then let them come." That afternoon, the circle met again, though the tension pressed heavier than the books on their desks. Priya's hands shook so badly her tea spilled, staining the notebook covers stacked beside her. Luis muttered curses under his breath, eyes darting at the door every time it creaked. Emma stood at the front, notebook open, heart pounding. "I'm done hiding," she said. "We don't need permission to learn. We don't need a teacher to tell us it's okay to fail. We already know." Luis barked a humorless laugh. "And what about Harris? He's watching us like we're criminals. And your mom. You think she won't shut you down too?" Emma's hand tightened around the marker. She turned to the board and scrawled one word in huge letters, 0. "This is where we start, with nothing. They can't take that away unless we let them." The kids stared silent. Then slowly Priya reached for her notebook. She scribbled down the word 0 in shaky letters, then underlined it twice. Luis rolled his eyes, but he picked up his pen. The air shifted. Not triumphant, not safe, but alive. That night, Emma walked home through the frozen dusk, the notebook heavy in her bag. The Carter mansion glowed ahead, all polished glass and immaculate hedges, but she felt none of its warmth. Her mother was waiting in the study, as if she had known Emma's steps would lead her there. Victoria closed the drawer as Emma entered, though Emma caught the faintest glimpse of the overlays tucked inside. Their eyes met like 2 swords clashing. "You're reckless," Victoria said without greeting. "Do you know how fast one whisper about our family spreads in this city? About me, about you." Emma stood straighter, her fingers trembling but her voice firm. "Maybe that's why you hide everything. Maybe that's why you've been hiding yourself." Victoria's lips thinned. You don't understand what I've had to build, what it cost me. If you knew... She stopped, jaw tightening. Emma's heart hammered. This was it. The line between silence and truth. She stepped closer. Then tell me. For a flicker, Victoria looked almost fragile, the iron mass slipping, but then it snapped back in place. I don't owe you my scars, she said coldly. Emma's throat ached, but she lifted the notebook from her bag and set it on the desk, the folded page with her secret still nestled inside. And I don't owe you my silence. She turned and walked out before her mother could answer. Upstairs in her room, Emma pinned another sentence to the wall. Her handwriting was sharp, jagged. Zero is not the absence of power. It is the choice to begin anyway. She stared at it, chest heaving. Tomorrow, she thought again. Tomorrow I stop pretending. But this time, the word tomorrow no longer felt like a whisper. It felt like a promise. The flyer went up on Monday, heavy cardstock taped to the main stairwell, under the glare of a trophy case, Ridgeview Annual Speech Contest, Theme, Voice, and Identity. A line of smaller text promised scholarships, a gold-plated plaque, the whole polished future. Students slowed to read it, whispering in clumps, eyes bright with a hunger Emma recognized because it had started to wake in her too. She stood there longer than she meant to backpack strap, digging into her shoulder, the green notebook warm against her ribs. Voice and identity. It felt less like a prompt and more like a dare. She didn't tear off a registration tab. She didn't need to. She already knew what she would say. That night she spread her notebook and a mess of loose pages across her bedroom carpet. The house murmured its rich, empty noises, the HVAC's soft exhale, the occasional click of settling glass, none of it louder than the sentence she'd pinned to the wall. Zero is not the absence of power. It is the choice to begin anyway. She wrote until cramped fingers forced her to stop, then copied the best parts by hand, then cut entire paragraphs that sounded like performance instead of blood. When the words finally held, they were plain and sharper for it. She could hear Daniel's voice under them cut the adjectives. Let the sound stand, and Priya's whisper, I heard it, and even Luis's reluctant grunt when a line was true. Yeah, keep that one. The auditorium on contest night was all varnished wood and fake ferns lining the stage, the air bright with perfume and nerves. Parents dressed like weekends at country clubs. Teachers swapped bets with eyes. A row of judges sat behind a ribbon table, their programs held like shields. On the left side near the aisle, Ms. Delgado waved Emma over and squeezed her hand just once, quick and fierce. You've already done the hard part, she said. You told yourself the truth. Emma swallowed. Backstage, other contestants paced and rehearsed, lips moving around memorized promises. She stood very still. The paper in her hands had the shaky crease of something folded and unfolded too many times. In the fifth row, Victoria Carter took a seat picked for maximum invisibility and minimum risk. Not the front expectation, not the back disdain, but center left where you could see but not be seen. Her jaw was set in its usual boardroom line, but a small device nestled in her ear. Emma didn't notice it. Daniel did from his post near the exit sign's red hum. He stayed in the shadow cap, pulled low uniform, too clean for an evening. Lily's small hand was in his. She refused to miss the brave girl's speech, as she'd been calling it all week. When she started to wave at Emma like she was signaling a plane, Daniel gently lowered her arm. After he whispered, We clap after. Principal Hayes, not Harris. The building only needed one principal, and it was him took the stage and did his careful, neutral welcome, the kind that says everything and nothing. Contestant 1 read an essay about leadership that sounded like a brochure. Contestant 2 told a story about a grandmother that belonged on a Hallmark card but still got a few sniffles. Contestant 3 performed metaphors like tricks, the crowd oohing when they landed neatly. Number 4. Hayes announced Emma Carr. He stopped himself with a professional cough. Emma. Emma walked into the light. It felt like stepping into a kiln. She found the tape X on the stage and planted her feet on it, the paper held loose at her side. For a second, the auditorium became what it had always been to her, rows of faces, measuring the air thick with prove it, and her throat tried to close. She looked out and saw not faces, but small anchors, Miss Chiquia's. Delgado's lifted chin. Lily's hands gripping the seat back like she was bracing for a roller coaster drop, the glint of a tiny earpiece in her mother's ear. "My name is Emma Carter," she began, and the whisper moved like a wind through the room. Carter, that last name, a brand and a verdict. She let it settle. Then she breathed and let the next line cut it clean. "But tonight," she said, "I left the name at the door." Silence tightened, curious now, some of it hostile. She didn't flinch. "I failed a lot this year," she went on, each word placed like a brick. "Not in secret, in public. On tests passed hand to hand like gossip. I failed in a school where my last name could buy me everything except understanding." She didn't look at her mother. She didn't need to. She kept her eyes at the level of the cheap balcony lights where the dust flared like sparks. "A man who wasn't supposed to matter told me something I didn't want to hear. He said, 'If you want to win, start at zero.' I thought it was an insult. Turns out it was permission. Zero is where the noise stops. Zero is where your hands shake and you write anyway. Zero is where you say the hard thing out loud and your voice doesn't break, not because you're fearless, but because you're tired of decorating the truth." She let the line hang. Somewhere someone coughed and then choked it down. "I could tell you a story about a girl with a famous mother," she said, softer now, letting the edges show. "About marble floors and the sound of heels like judgment. About a drawer full of alphabet cards and a machine that reads out loud when the letters won't line up. I could tell you how we both learned to hide just for different reasons." In the fifth row, Victoria stopped breathing. The device in her ear translated her daughter's cadence into clear sound, every pause a rung on a ladder she'd been too proud to admit she needed. "But the story isn't about the name," Emma said. "It's about the work, writing words until they stop lying. Failing on purpose until fear gets bored and leaves. Letting go of applause because winning the moment isn't the same as winning your life." She looked down at the paper for the first time, not to read, but to steady herself. Then she folded it in half and set it on the floor. Her hands were empty now. "If you see me," she said, voice steady as the floorboards, "don't see a Carter. See a kid who started at zero and is willing to start there again tomorrow. See the janitor who mopped more than floors. See the kids who sat in a circle and clapped for each other's worst attempts. See all the names we left at the door so we could pick up our voices." She stepped back from the mic. For a second, the room resisted, muscles clenched against an unfamiliar kind of honesty. Then Priya, dead center, 2 rows behind the judges, started clapping, too loud at first. Then Luis palms like drumheads. Ms. Delgado stood. Lily whooped like she'd just watched someone stick a landing. The applause spread in a wave that found even the polite hands and made them real. In the back, Daniel did not clap right away. He exhaled. The exit sign washed his face in red, and he looked older and lighter than he had in months. When he did bring his hands together, it was with the measured rhythm of someone acknowledging work done right, not a miracle granted. From her aisle seat, Victoria pressed 2 fingers to the device in her ear, as if to quiet it and hear the room raw. She stood too. Not first, not last. When Emma stepped off stage and disappeared into the curtain dark, their eyes met across the aisle, no acknowledgement, no nod, nothing performative. Just a thread taut and thin and new. The program moved on. Finalists announced polite speeches made, but for Emma the night split in 2 before she said it, and after. Across campus, in a room that smelled like coffee and policy, the school board gathered. A long table, careful water pitchers, a printed agenda with an item near the bottom. Discussion. Unapproved after school. Writing Group East Wing Library. Principal Hayes did his due diligence liability chain of command photos that made people in suits shift in their chairs. The head of facilities recommended immediate cease and desist. Miss Delgado spoke last from the gallery seats, not quite invited to the table, her voice calm and edged with steel. "They're not breaking anything," she said. "They're building something. If we can't see the difference, that's on us." "Let's hear from the employee," a board member said. The room turned to Daniel, who sat against the wall in his cleanest shirt like a man who'd been called to testify in his own small trial. "I'm not proposing a class," he said. "I'm proposing a corner, a sanctioned time and place where kids can show up with notebooks and not be mocked for failing. 10 minutes on the clock. A room that tells the truth back to them." "A janitor proposing pedagogy," someone muttered. "Meaning to wound." Daniel didn't bristle. "A dad," he corrected quietly. A former teacher whose program lost its funding when writing wasn't shiny enough. A man who knows that if you don't give kids a place to put their fear, they'll find one you don't like. The board shifted. The room felt like it was leaning toward a no out of habit. Then Victoria stood. She had slipped in 3 minutes late, silent as leverage, and taken a chair near the door. Now she moved to the end of the table, placed both palms on the gleaming wood, and spoke in a tone usually reserved for hostile takeovers and emergency settlements. "My daughter read tonight," she said. "I listened to every word. She didn't mention the device. She didn't need to. You're debating risk. I'm offering structure. Create an official after-school writing lab. You can put whatever guardrails you need on it. I will endow it for 5 years through a fund that doesn't carry my family name." A small thunder of whispers. Someone asked cautious, "Why hide the name?" "Because legacies choke," she said simply. "And because some rooms should belong to the kids who fill them, not the donors who funded them." Hayes cleared his throat. "Miss Carter, with respect, philanthropy cannot override." "It can partner," she said not unkindly. "I am not buying a program. I am telling you the money will be there if you have the courage to say yes." Silence gathered weight. Then a younger board member, eyes less tired than the rest, raised her hand. "I move. We pilot the lab through the end of the year with monthly oversight and student sign-ups capped for safety." Second, another said. Hands rose. "Not all. Enough." Motion carried. The meeting emptied with the awkward efficiency of people surprised to have done something decent. In the doorway, Daniel and Victoria met without audience or script. "Thank you," he said, those 2 words scraped clean. She held his gaze. "Don't thank me. She did the work. A beat. You showed her where to stand. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to." Lily darted between them, waving a program with a star scribbled next to Emma's name. "She won," Lily announced to no one and everyone. "She won because she told the truth." "We all did, a little," Victoria said, and the admission cost her, which made it worth more. The next morning, an envelope waited on the Carter doorstep, fat with promise. Emma tore it like a kid on Christmas. Hastings College of Liberal Arts offered admission with a small scholarship and a note about their writing program's community-based practice. She read it twice, then, a third time out loud, savored the way the words tasted in the room. Victoria stood in the doorway in a robe and bare feet, a version of herself the city never saw. "Hastings," she said, measuring the syllables. "Not Ivy." "It's right," Emma said. "For me." Victoria nodded once the movement small and seismic. "Then it's right." Emma crossed the room and, for the first time in a long time, hugged her mother without bracing for impact. Victoria's hands settled at her daughter's back like they were remembering where to go. When Emma pulled away, she grinned through tears she didn't apologize for. "I have to tell them," she said, already running toward her room for her phone, for her shoes, for the green notebook that had become less a book and more a compass. Across town, a custodian propped a door with a rubber wedge and started setting out chairs in a circle, counting under his breath while the floor dried. On the wall above the whiteboard, a fresh piece of cardboard waited for a marker to bite into it. He wrote the 3 words the room deserved, like a blessing. "Start at 0." Outside, the day was glass cold and bright. Inside, something warmer was getting ready to begin. By spring, the East Wing Library no longer smelled only of dust and binding glue. It carried the tang of marker ink, the warm musk of old wood after rain, and something harder to name, a charged expectancy like air before a storm. Chairs formed a circle most afternoons, notebooks piled on the center table, laughter spilling under the door, even on days heavy with tests and tension. Emma came first that Wednesday, dropping her backpack with the careless weight of someone who trusted the room to hold her. She flipped through her green notebook now, thick with crossings out and taped-in scraps, its cover scuffed soft from use. Across the margins ran phrases that had once terrified her to say, but now felt like small victories. "I failed this one. I'll try again." Daniel set down the mop handle he carried like a staff and pulled up a chair. "You'll read today?" he asked. Not pressing, just placing the possibility on the table like a choice. Emma smiled. "Yeah, I think I will." The others trickled in. Priya with earbuds tangled in her wrist. Luis balancing a basketball under one arm. 2 new freshmen carrying notebooks stiff with inexperience. Lily ran ahead of them all, her braid swinging, and wrote in blocky letters on the whiteboard, 10 minutes, start at 0. When Emma read, her voice no longer stammered. The words carried weight, landing with the kind of silence that meant everyone in the room was listening. It wasn't a performance, it was survival turned into music. And when she finished, no one clapped right away. They just sat with it, letting the truth settle. Then Luis rapped his knuckles against the chair in approval. Priya whispered fire, and Lily clapped until her palms stung. Outside the glass doors, Principal Hayes paused, hand on the knob. He'd meant to check on the lab, make sure it wasn't turning into chaos. But the sight stilled him. Kids leaning forward, notebooks open, fear softened into something like courage. He closed the door quietly instead, leaving them to it. That night, Emma brought her notebook home and left it on the kitchen counter instead of hiding it upstairs. Victoria found it there next to a cold glass of water. She ran her fingers over the cover, then opened to a page halfway through. The words weren't polished, but they were alive. I am not my last name. I am not my grades. I am the girl who begins again. For once, Victoria didn't correct margins or grammar in her mind. She closed the book and left it where her daughter had placed it, a small act of respect louder than any speech. Weeks later, Emma stood on a different stage, the gymnasium at Hastings College, banners heavy with spring light. She read an essay about failure as foundation and was awarded the freshman writing prize. The applause rolled over her like a tide, but she thought of the circle in the east wing of ink-stained fingers and cheap paper of the janitor who had told her the most radical thing, start at 0. Daniel was there sitting with Lily on his shoulders, both of them clapping until they hurt. When Emma caught his eye across the crowd, he didn't give her a thumbs up or a grin. He just nodded the quiet approval of someone who had seen the work and knew what it cost. Later in the parking lot, Victoria joined them. She carried no entourage, no tailored armor, just a bouquet too large for her hands. She offered it without words, and Emma took it, laughing through tears. Daniel held the car door open for both mother and daughter, a small courtesy that felt like a bridge. On the drive back, Lily leaned forward from the back seat. Does this mean we don't have to start at 0 anymore? Emma glanced out the window at the rolling fields, the horizon wide as possibility. No, she said softly. It means we get to start at 0 every time we need to. Victoria reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. She didn't let go. In that moment, the world was not marble floors or headlines or balance sheets. It was a circle of chairs, a mop leaning against a wall, a notebook filled with failures that had somehow become a map. It was family chosen and blood stitched together by the courage to begin again. And in a library that still smelled faintly of dust and ink, another kid walked in with shaking hands, clutching a fresh notebook. On the board, 3 words waited to meet him, like a promise: start at 0. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.